Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you all for joining us and a very warm welcome to yet another episode of Ginan Insights, a webinar series dedicated to exploring different facets of Ginan Granth literature, thus deepening our understanding of this remarkable poetic heritage. I'm Meera Mawani, your host, and I'm delighted to have you joining us today for the second part of Dr. Amrita Shodhan's talk on the impact of colonial governance on Ismaili religious authority and Ginans. In part one of Dr. Amrita Shodhan's presentation, she explored how British colonial law reshaped Ismaili religious authority and identity of the Khoja community in the 19th century Bombay. In this session, she will continue to examine the 1866 Great Aga Khan case and how the Khoja religious literature, especially the Ginans, fit with Sunni or Shia religious beliefs as understood from Arabic Islam. I'm honored to welcome Dr. Amrita Shodhan again as our guest speaker. Dr. Shodhan is a senior research fellow in the Department of History at SOAS, University of London. She holds a PhD from University of Chicago, and her doctoral research examined the legal representation of Khoja and Pushti Marga Vaishnava communities in mid-19th century Bombay. Her work has been published as a book, A Question of Community, Religious Groups and Colonial Law, which is really essential reading for anyone who wants to understand how colonial legal frameworks reshaped the way religious communities in India were defined, governed, and understood. Dr. Shodhan has also worked on the history of Gujarat and gender and modernity. Her other publications include in 2023 an article, The Communal Question and Partition in British India and Palestine, in the edited volume, The Breakup of India and Palestine. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Amrita Shodhan. Over to you, Amrita.
Thank you so much, Meera. That's really kind and a nice introduction. I'm really very, very happy to be here. Last time also, I really enjoyed speaking to your audience. It's a privilege to be able to speak to people who believe in the things that I have read just as an academic. But one of the reasons why I was interested in this topic of colonial governance and religious identity of the Khojas was also because as a Pushti Margi and I was interested in the same topic. And then I saw that there is a broad field of religious spiritual belief which is impacted by which was impacted by the way in which colonial authority was established, the way in which they used the laws, the way in which people had to claim rights in the law and sort out differences, etc. So just to recap for last time, almost a month ago, we looked at the 1860, we looked at several developments over the colonial period and how they ended up in the 1866 case, having to look at the Khojas in their origins. And that looking at Khojas in their origins came from the use of English law of property and charitable trusts, which I looked at last time. And the court required, in order to apply this law of charitable property, they had to use an understanding of religion in its origin. And because of the circumstances and the way in which they understood religion, the way they understood the relationship between the local and the colonial government, they employed a reified and Orientalist understanding of Islam. They did the same with Hinduism in the Maharaj Libel case. So I compared the two last time. And today I want to just go into the implications of this way of looking at the Khoja beliefs in the case. So the case required a decision on who owns the Khoja properties or who could use the Khoja properties. And in order to determine that, they had to see who had the right religious belief. The court approached the question of religious belief by looking at it as a matter of fact. And look at all that. So I'm just going over what I will look at in the essay in the lecture today, I'll first look at how the court approached the question of religious belief. Then I will examine how the court identified two major concepts, one of conversion and the other of taqiyya or dissimulation or concealment as the central identity of the Khojas. And then it also identified the Imam as central to Khoja belief. And then I look a little bit at the maintenance of the Ginan, or how the Ginan is saved for us today, almost a century and a half later. And beginning with Imam Begum, who was the last composer of Ginans. We heard her beautiful Ginan at the start here today. So that's what I'm going to do today. But first, to just share with you a few other compositions to show that the Ginanic literature was really part of a broad tradition of religious secular, not secular, sorry, religious spiritual culture of Gujarat and of Sindh and Punjab as well. That there, and there's lots of academic writing now on this shared religious culture, where those believers do not use either the term Hindu or the term Muslim. Sometimes syncretism is used as a dismissive term for this kind of literature, or folk, that this was folk and not a classical tradition. But despite that, now this new academic understanding of this literature shows that we were really there was a real meaning and a real there's a real meaning to this work, this kind of shared literature, shared music, bhakti, shared feeling that shows the similarity with music. So I'm just going to play some of this poetry. You can just hear the So that was an audio from Vaishnav Dhol. It's called Dhol music. That's a type of Vaishnav singing, or bhajan, if you like. This is another kind of Saurashtra from Kathiawad. This, oh no, sorry, this is a Bora.
याद आओ छो घना ए शाह बुरहान दी
This is a Daudi Bora ras, or called ras.
छो घना ए शाह बुरहान दी आपनी नूरानी सूरत याद आवे छे घनी आपनी मौला सलामी याद आवे छे घनी.
The next one is a Kathiawadi song from
हेजी मौलडा डगे नहीं पानबाई भांगी रे पड़े रे ब्रह्मांड जी.
And there's another song that people might know, Niranjan Rajguru, who spoke at IIS a couple of times. So just to give a recognition that there is more to that Khoja Ginan existed along with a large field of this kind of religious experience and religious and that's recognized in the new kind of academic work that we see. There's one very good article by Malisson, Françoise Malisson, and she's talked about one particular Ginan, the Nagdaman Ginan, which is present as part of, in many versions, 6 or 7 versions, and she traces its history to Narsi, who is a late 15th, early 16th century poet, who's seen as a Vaishnava poet. And he has the same song about the defeat of the snake Kali in the river Jamuna. And she, so Malisson uses a lot of the medieval literature of the 15th, 16th century to show the existence of this poem of the defeat of the snake and the victory of the god, or a victory of spiritual victory over. And then this story of the defeat of Kalinag by Krishna is interpreted in symbolic and symbolic terms as the victory of uh, good over evil in a sense. But the themes, the way the song is written, the conversations between the snake and Krishna are similar in the Ginan and the Vaishnava poetry. And that's what she has shown from medieval literature. So I thought that shows that not only is this similarity of that we are hearing in the 21st century, the similarity in sound, but there was a medieval similarity uh, between um, that was actually shared. And she says that probably there was a folk tradition, or there was a well-known um, repertoire, if you like, of folk stories that were being used by these various religious groups to speak to the people about religion, or to speak to the people about their ideas of truth, rightness, etc. So that's just to show how valid this kind of understanding of Khoja Ginan is. But when we come to 1866 and the case, to understand how the case uses this literature, um, we find quite a different way of dealing with the literature. The case was called the Aga Khan case, and it was fought from 1866. The people who were in charge of the case was Karim Khan, who was the Aga Khan secretary, and Mukhi Allah Rakhya Sumar, whose picture is on the side. And the many people who helped the Aga Khan with the case are called the Panjabai. They were given the name Panjabai, then becomes popular in Khoja practices after the case, and it shows the Aga Khan gave this title to them. It shows his respect for them, for their help. So that's just briefly. The dispute among the Khojas was positioned by the complainants. The complainants were reformist Khoja commercial magnates, people like Habib Ibrahim, who was later became, in 1851, he was an investor in a textile mill, and then he had other textile mills. So they were really rich and important Khojas. And he's and his party, there were 12 of them, so they were often called the Bar Bhai. So there was the Panjabai versus the Bar Bhai. And they were called reformers. And they said that we were converted, according to these reformers, they said that we were originally Hindu and converted to Sunni Islam. And therefore, the Aga Khan should not be using our properties, the Jamaat Khana, etc. So the case was set up in the complaint as a case for recognizing the Sunni Islam of the original of the Khojas. So the other side, of course, the Aga Khan side, had to argue or prove that the Khojas were Shia Ismailis, and we look at how they come to this argument. And so the idea of conversion was already placed in this dispute at the start. They said the court, court interpreted what is conversion as a movement. They interpreted it as a movement from one religion to another fully formed religion. Thus, they looked for Khoja practices that fully conformed with either Sunni or Shia Islam. As the judge said, this question, whether the Khojas in their origin are Shia Imami Ismaili, is a historical question to be decided as a matter of fact. So he says, what are the Sunnis as distinct from the Shias? Then he says, we must find out what are the Shia Imami Ismailis. And then we look at what the Khojas are. So first he sets up these definitions of what is Shia, what is Shia Imami Ismaili, what is Sunnis. As a historical question, as a matter of fact. And for that, he looks for information about what is Shia and Sunni in texts of Orientalist texts that looked, and I'll come to that, which were the particular texts he uses. And all the Khojas who were examined as witness in the case had to demonstrate either their Khojahood as either Shia or Sunni. So they had to say what they are doing and see if it matches the court-defined Sunni or Shia. So there was a lot of difficulty that many witnesses had on fitting into these categories. All the witnesses, so any arguments that they made outside the category of Shia and Sunni was seen as meaningless or unacceptable. So there is, for example, evidence given by Muhammad Dama. He said, I'm a member of the Jamaat of the Khojas. My religion is Shia. Then he stopped. He said, no, sorry, Sunni. So I was twice married in the Sunni form. That is the reason I have for knowing I'm Sunni. And then the court and the judge and the lawyers started laughing. So the court could not accept this kind of identification of religion. So the witness then restated his opinion. He said, no, I say the kalma, and I have never followed any religion but the Sunni. So there was no way in which he could identify his Sunniness. And then there were multiple other cases. For example, an earlier case before Justice Perry, the witness Habib Ibrahim said, some say we are Sunni, some say we are Shia, but our religion is a separate religion. Aga Khan is esteemed as a great man amongst us. Since we keep beards, we are Mohammedans. So our religion is a different religion. And then there's another witness in 1866 about using the Ginan Maulaka Kalam. He says, Maulaka Kalam is a simple book in which good moral precepts are recommended. It is neither a Sunni book nor a Shia book. It is a good book. And again, there is laughter in the court. So attempts to describe Khoja text and practices as something different from Sunni or Shia Islam were seen as meaningless and utterly unacceptable as definitions of Khojahood. It was in search of this demonstration that various Khoja practices were examined, not just what these few things I said, the manner in which they hold their hands in the mosque or in the Jamaat Khana, whether they use mosque or Jamaat Khana, whether they use a Sunni priest or a Shia for their rituals, whether they pray 5 times a day or 3 times, whether they go for pilgrimage to Mecca or Karbala or to the Darkhana. So whether they gave money to the Jamaat in the name of the Imam or not. These were also discussed, and it's on the basis of some of these that the manner of the person's being, clothes, practices, actions, they became markers of identity. That's how they showed their Khojahood, not by what they believe or not by their poetry. So in this idea of conversion, Gauri Vishwanath is a very good post-colonial scholar, and she argues conversion as the study of conversion as agents responsible for conversion, or from one religion to another religion, is seen mostly in colonial practice. This is the way conversion is understood by the colonial authorities. Conversion in this way is seen as a political tool for increasing followers. So it's quite a mechanical or political understanding of what conversion or changing from one religion to the other is. She says it really pays no attention to, sorry, one sec. It really pays no attention this idea of two well-established positions between which the move takes place is a transfer of individual from one community to another without recognizing the importance of the transformation of belief. She gives numerous examples of how converts are treated like this in colonial law, and looking at different court cases and about parents getting their sons back from religious authorities, etc. In all these instances, administrative and social leaders see conversion as a calculated political tool rather than an act of faith, which attempts to bring, and this act of conversion brings the change of religion into politics. So it becomes a very political matter for them. And she says she doesn't look at the Aga Khan case, but I'm saying in the Aga Khan case too, conversion was discussed as a political tool, devoid of a change in faith, devoid of a change in belief. So we should, she says, instead of looking at conversion like that, to understand the person who has converted properly, we need to see conversion as a meaningful descent from one tradition and the interpretation of the new tradition in their own terms. So when you see that the person who is converting is not just leaving one group to join another group, but they are actually understanding their rejecting something that they think is not proper and accepting something else that they think is valuable. So if we look at that, the faith of the believer becomes more important in our discussion. And the only item of faith that really was looked at during the case was some of the Ginan, and primarily one Ginan, which was the Dasavtar, which has many versions of the Dasavtar, but the Dasavtar Ginan was the Ginan where the 10th avatar is described as the avatar Ali, who is the descendant of Vishnu, if you like. But the case, obviously, if you see the way in which the conversion is set up from between Shia and Sunni, the question of Vishnu or Hinduism then becomes completely unacceptable or dissonant in their argumentation. So for the long time, the case, in fact, both parties in the case, the reformers as well as the Aga Khanis, they denied the existence of the Ginan. The Dasavtar Ginan describing Ali as the avatar of Vishnu was denied by both as irrelevant. In the middle of the case, for example, they even don't call it Dasavtar, but use the word Desatir, which is a Zoroastrian text for different religions. So this is how the plaintiff, the Khoja merchant's lawyer, Mr. Anstey, presents the idea, the book, the text, Dasavtar. The lawyer even makes the argument that the use of this text showed that Desatir showed that actually they were not even Orthodox or Muslims of any kind, they were Zoroastrians. So this ploy of Anstey did not work. The Dasavtar was too well known in the community. So halfway through the arguments, Mukhi Alarakhya Sumar uses the title of the Ginan correctly. He identifies the Dasavtar as the text describing different forms of the Godhead and Ali as the promised 10th avatar. As can be imagined, this presented dissonance in the normative paradigm of Shia and Sunni that was used by the court. So it was the Aga Khan's party, his secretary Karim Khan's statement, where he first says in the argument that the Dasavtar is used as tool of conversion begun by the Dais sent to Sindh and Hind by the Imams. So the Dasavtar and other Ginans are included within Shiism as a tool of conversion. However, I mean, this was a very innovative argument for its time. In 1866, this was not the commonly understood meaning of any Hindu references in the Ginan. In contrast to this, in an earlier legal case in 1851, the Dasavtar and other practices are described as Hindu remnants, that these are left behind ideas but not used as tools. Then again, so this was a case before Justice Perry. I described it actually last time as well. He raised an objection that we don't need to think of it as Hindu remnants. These people may be migrant from Iran, and the immigrant groups from Iran to India were absorbed or influenced by Hinduism, and therefore they have Hindu ideas. So given this history of describing the Ginan as Hindu remnants or Hindu influences, it was not settled how the Ginan has to be interpreted. Karim Khan's argument, therefore, was quite innovative. So, in being unable to say that they are unimportant, he gives this explanation. Then his lawyer, Howard, goes on after, in the closing argument, he says that the text of the 10 incarnations bore evidence of having been written to smooth the conversion of Hindus to Islam, and 9 of these incarnations are of Hindu origin, but the 10th had Ali as the incarnate. As recorded in the case proceedings, in the middle of Howard's argument, Howard is the lawyer, the judge, Justice Arnold, remarked that the learned gentleman's point was to show that they, the Ginans, could not have been composed by a Sunni, but might have been composed by a Shia. Thus, the judge makes the necessary link. He makes the necessary link showing that the Ginan texts composed for the conversion of Hindus to Islam were Shia. The fact that there was nothing essentially Shia about using local ideas or Hindu ideas for conversion to Islam was used then for conversion by Sufis in Bengal, etc. But that was not recognized in the case. The judge, in his judgment, elaborated on this link he found between Ismaili Shiism and the strategy of conversion by using Hindu figures in the Ginan. He cites for this Sylvester de Sacy. He's a French Orientalist. The judge quoted his introduction from the text Exposé de Religion des Drus, in which the author describes the instructions given to the Dai or the Ismaili missionary. The strategy of the mission was the missionary must present himself as a sincere partisan of the doctrine professed by the subject. Thus, to a Shia, he must pose as a Shia, to a Sunni as a Sunni, to a Hindu as a Hindu, and so on. He must then posit the Ismaili doctrine as the necessary completion of the Shia or Sunni doctrine, respectively. In the Sacy's text, this understanding of the strategy of conversion is a masterly reduction of von Hammer's discussion of 9 stages of initiation into the Ismaili doctrine. The initiation of the convert began with the raising of self-doubt, and so in those 9 stages, von Hammer has described the method of conversion. He says in the beginning it's raising self-doubt, and then gradually leads to understanding of full Ismaili knowledge. One could interpret the method of conversion as one where the missionary first admits a premise of the religion of the prospective convert, then raises doubts, and finally introduces Ismaili doctrine as a solution to the doubts. These were the directives given by the Imam's missionaries to the Dais. While von Hammer's description may be accurate insofar as it describes the missionary strategy in medieval times, how these directives could be translated into the Ginan tradition follows a very indirect route from the lawyer's argument to the judge's conclusion. However, the judge's pronouncement on the Ginans as conversion literature was very clear, and it became definitive in the subsequent characterization of Ginanic literature. And the Aga Khan, third Aga Khan, Imam himself recognizes in his own statement that this was the status. So they are seen as temporary halts in a way to a more true Islam. And we look at The other main argument that was used in looking at the Ginan and other aspects of Khoja practice with the idea of takiya, that it was takiya that explains many things that were not seen as properly Shia or properly Shia. So mental reservation or concealment was at the center of Ismaili practice. It's used by both groups and the judge as well to explain some of the Sunni practices that were described. For example, a mosque that was used by the reformist Khojas. He says, okay, they had to use the mosque because they had to not go openly, but it's the mosque was only established in 1822. So it wasn't really that through medieval times, the Khojas used to go to Sunni mosques. They did go to the Jamaat Khana publicly. So there is no dissimulation or no takiya about going to the Jamaat Khana. And many of the other aspects, the dissimulation was considered necessary because the judge goes into a lot about Sunni bigotry and fanaticism. So their Orientalist prejudices helps to be convincing, the judge convincing himself that yes, any practice that people are using that is not properly Shia is required for hiding from Sunni governments, that Mughal. And we know that there was actually different Mughal kings or emperors were did execute many of the Shia, or some of, not many, but some of the Shia leaders of the time. So this is used as an argument. So dissimulation, also another argument he uses, he says, oh, if your wife asks you for money for jewelry, you can just say that you don't have enough money, and that's allowed because that kind of white lie. So concealment or reservation, mental reservation or concealment is at the center of this understanding of what is Khoja practice. So Khojas had to pretend of certain things that are not really part of their belief. And the another aspect of the judgment was also the primacy to the imam. So judge says first they have to define whether they are Shia or Sunni, but then they also have to show a direct link to the imam. And that was a convincing evidence was presented to the judge about this. Convincing evidence was presented. So I'll go into the evidence first, but he asks three questions: who or what is the Aga Khan? Who or what? And he says, independently of their belief are the Khojas. So what are the Khojas? What have their relations to the Aga Khan been? And what have been the relations of the first defendant, who is the Aga Khan, with the particular community members in Bombay? So really, the relationship between Khojas and the Aga Khan was important in identifying who the Khojas were. As he says, not in relation to their beliefs, in relation to real practices. Show me the evidence, he says, right? And the Khojas did show long history of payment of the Sond, so tithe to the Imam that was sent over the last at least 200 years. The earliest evidence they presented was 1730s. And in the case, there was also evidence of respect to the Imam. So even Habib Ibrahim, who is a reformer Khoja, says that the Aga Khan is highly respected. And the Pir Sadruddin and other peers were seen as messengers from the Imam. The question of avatar or presence of the divine person was seen as a theological question. So the court says they cannot discuss this theological question. But we just have, we leave that aside, but we can prove that there was a relationship with the Aga Khan, and therefore the Khojas were followers of the Imam. And that's the judgment. So at the end of the case, he says, in order to enjoy the full privilege of membership in the community, a Khoja a person must be of that sect whose ancestors were originally Hindus, who were converted and has throughout abided in the faith of the Shia Imami Ismailis, and which has always been, and still they are bound by ties of spiritual allegiance to the hereditary Imam of the Ismailis. So the judgment then gives this final definition of who should be a Khoja. The authority of the Imam and the classical faith of the Shia Ismailis was accepted in the judgment. All ideas that did not fit the definition of a classical Arabic Persian Islam were seen as folk or syncretic or mixed. In a classical value system, a syncretic or folk belief was not valued as inauthentic. It was not valued as authentic. So it was not really proper belief. It should change over time to a more classical idea. Thus, the rise in the presence of the Imam and his direct contact with the followers replaces the local inspiration of faith. And I'll just come to that a little bit. So at the same time as the case was going on, we have Imam Begum, who was the last composer of the Ginan. She was born in 1785 and died in 1866, according to Varteji. She traveled to Bombay from Karachi, and she lived in Bombay and sang the Ginan at the Bombay Jamaat Khana and also at the Mahim. So she was reportedly not approved of by Imam Hassan Ali Shah. There appears to be some incidents, but she is accepted now by the Imam, and she's accepted within the Ismaili fold. One oral account suggests that the opposition to her was rooted in a patriarchal concern of male Khoja members who said, oh, their wives participate too intensely in Imam Begum's discourses and they neglect their domestic duties. So Imam Begum to me represents continuity of older Khoja beliefs and the unity of a community with its beliefs. The disapproval attributed to the Aga Khan sets up a kind of opposition to the continuity of Khoja tradition. And the Aga Khan at the time in 1840s and 50s was also shown to be introducing prayers, forms of worship, new taxes, as well as the inheritance case that we discussed last time, new inheritance laws. So there was some difference between the practices of the Khojas in Bombay and the first Aga Khan when he came to Bombay. He came from Iran, as you know. In this context, so there is the newly introduced paradigm of Ginans as conversion literature, the denial of the centrality of the Ginans, and the cessation of Ginanic composition after her. Can we link that? Is there a new assertion of authority and the decline in this kind of Ginanic or Sayyid, the authority of the Sayyids? That's just a question that one can ask. However, throughout, after the case as well, from the 1870s, there was a steady trickle out of the Aga Khan, out of the main Khoja Ismaili group to Ithnashris, Twelvers, and Sunnis as well. And there was a big case, as you know, some of you may know, in 1908 with Haji Bibi. She was Aga Khan's niece, the third Aga Khan's aunt. The judgment in that case, again, there was a lengthy discussions. And in this case, Haji Bibi and her supporters denied all knowledge of the Ginan. They said, we don't know any Ginan, we don't practice this. This is not proper Khoja or Shia practice. In fact, she asserted that the Iranian practices as the correct practices. So there then followed a long and drawn-out polemic between the Ithnashri and the Ismaili groups after this 1908 case. There is Edalji Dhanji Kaaba and others who wrote extensively, trying to show that the community was Ithnashriya and not Ismaili. So they are Shia, but not Ismaili. The Ginan literature in this dispute, as in the previous one, was supported by the Ismaili group. So Mukhilalji Devraj published large collections of Ginans. Other tracts of Pir Sadruddin's Atmadarshan, Brahm Prakash were also published. And Varteji, whose picture is on the screen, he was one of the important reinterpreters of the Ginan. He even published Imam Begum and Bai Budai's Ginans. This time, the grounds for accepting these Ginans were not as a means of conversion, but as a recognition of the Ismailis being different from Hindus and Muslims, and that attempt to bridge a gap between the Hindus and Muslims. Varteji says Imam Shah and Manwant Banu Bai Budhai worked as the dais of the Zahir Imam and made successful and immortal efforts for removing the differences between Hindu and Muslim in Hind. In all his publications, under the auspices of the Ismaili Sahitya Mandal as well as the Satpant Sahitya series, he insisted that the Ismaili religion did not differentiate between Hindus and Muslims. He employed Vedic terms like Aham Brahmasmi and showed how this was the same as in the Quranic ayat and Hazrat Ali's explanations through Beds. And he said both these, the Quranic ayats and Beds, as well as the Vedic ideas, they are both expressed best in the Ginans. So the acceptance by the third Imam of the Ginanic stream of belief of the Khojas was very important in preserving the Khoja sense of community and belonging. This could only have been done on the higher ground that Varteji and others found in the 1920s, namely the argument that the Khoja faith was neither typically Hindu nor Muslim, but a different interpretation. And you realize the context at the time, 1920s, was the context of growing differences between Hindus and Muslims. The third Imam, he was also very pro Hindu-Muslim unity. He was a big supporter of it, of the 1911 Hindu-Muslim conference. And he also took part in the All India Muslim Conference in 1928, which opposed the Muslim League at that time. So in that context, the whole role of the Ginan is understood quite differently, and it's preserved. So from this point of view, a creative and healthy identity of the community is possible through the use of the Ginan in different ways. So the interpretation of the Ginan is often done in the context of its time by its by the political authorities or religious authority. And that's just how I wanted to end there, saying how we would like in the 21st century to interpret the Ginan as the main kind of spiritual inspiration for the Khojas. And if we can locate this idea of conversion in a particular context of colonial imperial context, then we can get out of that mentality of conversion. So and that was the aim of this talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shodhan, for such an incisive and engaging talk. It was a pleasure to listen to you. We will begin our Q&A session shortly, so please write your questions in the chat box to me, or you can just write in the chat box. So you showed us how the court approached the question of religious beliefs through historical experts, oral testimony, and of course through religious literature, particularly the Ginans. You also outline how the 1866 court judgment identifies Ginans as conversion literature to explain the unique religious identity of the Khojas and to distinguish them from Sunni Muslims. And finally, how Ginans helped establish the Imam as central to Khoja beliefs, placing more importance on his identity than on specific external practices. So when you look at, so I have a question just in that context. Can you elaborate on what do you mean by more importance on his identity rather than specific external practices?
So because they did ask what are the practices, then they didn't fit either Shia or Sunni, because some was Jamaat Khana, so neither Shia nor Sunni went to Jamaat Khana. So they said, okay, it doesn't matter what you do, it shows that you had faith in the Imam. and that your relationship to Hassan Ali Shah and his ancestors, and they do include that in the legal discussion. So you must have an ancestral relationship because originally you must have been converted by his ancestors. And so it was not even what the Imam is doing today in Bombay that's important. It's what his ancestors did in relation to your ancestors, which is the original conversion that they try to find out. And because they were able to show older traditions of going to Kerman and presenting the son to the Aga Khan, and finances were always the convincing argument for the imperial colonial practice. So if you've shown it with your money, then that's real. That's more real than what you say. So even if you say Vishnu was a god, that's not as important as you've paid money to the you've paid your dasonda, paid your tithe. So it's the individual kind of practice of what, even they didn't ask what the Imam himself practices. For example, he probably didn't know some of the Ginan. So they didn't say, do you practice the Ginan? Have you used them? Right? It was not his practice that was important. It was the relationship, and then he identified as Ismaili. Then whatever Ismaili belief that he practiced was important only because of his person, not his what individual ideas or beliefs or practices were.
And the
I hope
lineage
that answers.
and the
And the
belief
lineage,
of
and the
people
lineage
in
and the
him.
long history of contact. Yes, that was more important.
Thank you. So I'm going to go through the questions from the beginning. So Khalil Andani asks some scholars, if you can just read from the
Yeah,
chat box, it'll be easier for you as well.
yeah,
So some scholars like Purohit and Rajni refer to the plaintiffs as leaders of the Khoja caste, but these same plaintiffs had been expelled from the caste by vote 3 times prior. So how could they be caste leaders given that?
yeah. That's a good question because the role, and I think this idea of Khojas as a caste or Jamaat was important. In the case, they presented evidence that these reformers, or I've not called them leaders because really the Mukhi and Kamadia were supporting. So officially, the leaders were the Mukhi and Kamadia, and they did support the Aga Khan at the time. But the Khoja magnates, they were called Sheikhs. So maybe they are translating the term Sheikh as leader. I don't know. Sheikh is a Gujarati term for identifying a merchant. Other translations have been merchant princes or merchant commercial magnates, things like that. So they were very rich and important people. So maybe that's why the term leader is used. But you can't really call them community leaders in the sense of official leaders. I think that's right.
Okay, we'll give Khalil a chance. Can you unmute yourself? Or
Yeah, yes. Thank you. No, I thank you, Dr. Sholan, for expanding on that. So yeah, the literature calls them like Setyas or Shetyas or
Shet,
something.
that's what I use. The Gujarati word is Shet.
So does that mean leader or does it mean
No.
something else?
Shet, well, in caste, they were the important people in the caste. I would not translate as leaders because the way
Okay.
we use the word leader, it's quite singular, that there other people cannot be leaders if you are leaders. But Shet, caste or Jamaats had multiple Shets.
Yeah, because
I would
the
probably
issue
put
is
it as
that
I would probably put it as
the
sorry.
argument was, but the argument I'm raising this because if you read Tina Purohit's book, which I think you reviewed it once a long time ago, and if you read Kumail Rajani's article that was published like a year ago, they seem to argue that look, the plaintiffs were like the actual official leaders, and then therefore their argument is that the Aga Khan effectively took over the caste from these other people, like he stole it or something. But if they're not official leaders, then this argument wouldn't really hold.
So the leaders, the other way I would explain to you is that many sheikhs owned the properties that were used by the Jamaats. So many of the properties that were being argued about, I mean, that was the case was about property and trespass. And they said, these properties are in our names in the collector's books. So we own them on behalf of the Jamaat, but the Jamaat trusts us. So in that sense, they were, they were not owners. That we go into the whole concept of charitable trust because people were allowed to own. They didn't give it ownership right, usufruct. They were usufruct rights or rights of usage rather than ownership. So the Jamaat can use it forever, even though it's listed in somebody else's name. And they had to give rights. The question was who, if the property is in Habib Ibrahim's name, for example, how is it that the Aga Khan has a right to use it? Or other members of the Jamaat. And therefore, they went into, if they originally believed in this conversion when it happened, then they have rights to use the property because the property is dedicated to the use of its original purpose. Its original purpose was determined at the time of conversion. I hope that makes it clear.
Yeah, yes, thank you so much.
So they are leaders only in that they owned some of the property. They did make decisions in the Jamaat, etc. But they were not officially the treasurer and the. So the Jamaat did have an official structure of which they had the Mukhi. The Mukhi is like a head of the Jamaat, and the Kamaria is the treasurer of the Jamaat, president and treasurer, if you like. And that was village like. Every village had that structure, which was set up by Pir Sadruddin in the 15th century. So there were official leaders, but not all Jamaats were. It was a more collective structure, the caste structure. And I'm using the word caste and Jamaat as equivalently because in the 19th century, the words did mean the same thing. It was not a Hindu-Muslim difference. The caste was, and the Hindus also used the word Jamaat for themselves. So Jamaat and caste is a collective structure of society in Gujarat where many groups of important men did make the decisions, the laws. Each caste or Jamaat had its own constitution. They became written constitutions in the 19th century, but before that, we have a lot of British even study of village to village. First, before they knew what the laws were, they did a survey of the laws and they had to interview castes. So it's not totally incorrect to say leaders, but there's no specific individual leadership like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There is another question. You mentioned Imam Begum is accepted by Imam now. What was the status at that time?
So the status that we know of is quite oral history that Imam Begum used to use a sarangi, or people criticized her for her attracting women too much away from their housewifely duties, etc. So there is no official excommunication or anything like that. It's not official, but there was some rumors, if you like, or discussion that the Imam disapproved of her majlis or her prayers.
Yes. Thank you. Was Baya allegiance to Imam a part of court case Khoja or Haji Bibi case?
I'm not
Khoja.
sure what is a Baya
I'm not sure too.
allegiance.
So allegiance to the Imam. So you give your allegiance to the Imam is called Baya.
Yeah. So 1861, that was 18. He circulated a book. Is that where everyone had to sign that they are followers of the Imam? Hasan Ali Shah sent people to different villages in Kutch, and that was part of the Aga Khan case. Before the Aga Khan case, even because there was an ongoing dispute from 1851 to 1862, and then the complaint was made in 1862, but the case only came to court in 1866. Yeah.
Um,
I think
so
in the Haji Bibi case also there was a circulation of the book where people had to attest to their faith. Yeah.
the next question is, please share some insights in today's time about the Guptis and the practice. Are their practices still hidden in today's time?
Yeah, so that's the current scholarship that I was describing at the start, that the Guptis, the Momnas, there's so many other groups that share the Ginanic tradition, they share the kind of spiritual faith. And the current context of rise of Hindutva, the people and not only rise of Hindutva, but because of the rise of Hindutva, there is a attempt to reconvert back to, or I don't know, back or forwards, but reconvert to Hinduism, people that the Hindus think were like the Momnas and Guptis. So there is a attempt to take over the shrines as well by different neighborhoods. And many of these shrines earlier were worshipped by people who identified as Hindu, but they didn't, that is earlier in the 20th century. They already the category Hindu and Muslim was set up, but despite the categories, people shared practices in many peer shrines. And it's only with this political rise in the last 15 years, 20 years, that there is a pressure on choosing one over the other. So you shouldn't go to Ajmer Dargah. There is no question that the Ajmer Dargah is Hindu, so it is a Muslim Dargah. Hindus went there in great numbers, but now there is a thing that if you are a Hindu, how can you go to this Dargah? Things like that. So that's my insight, is only that people, yeah, whether they are forced to hide their practices because of this pressure, or actually they did believe that you can use the term Rab or Allah or Hari for the same. So they are not actually hiding. It's that they find these words interchangeable and acceptable. So that would be a more liberal way of looking at conversion, that you accept spiritually powerful names from whichever tradition, linguistic and religious, that you find useful. So, yeah.
Thank you. I think about Guptis, I think even earlier during the third Aga Khan's time, a lot of the Guptis did come out on his when he had asked them to kind of
Yeah.
come out in the open. So that's a known fact. Another question is, how did the case impact the articulation of identity of Khojas on both sides, especially the Shia Imam Ismailis?
Well, that's what I've been trying to say.
Exactly.
It's quite a large question. It impacted in the long run. It impacted, I suppose, in the kind of reusing words, different words to be used, because of the category of Shia being set up on the basis of Orientalist understanding, as well as the classical and Orientalist understanding of Islam was Arabic, so that it's only Arabic or Arabic Persian Islam that was the proper Islam. So maybe that's the impact. In fact, the forcing of many of the reformers to choose Sunni as their identity, maybe also before the case, but they were already, because of these Orientalist um, value given to Sunni Islam, they thought maybe it's better to be called Sunni rather than Shia. So maybe the impact of colonialism, definitely we can see in the reform practices as well as in the case.
Thank you. Another question is, do you have a comment on the relationship of the Imam and the British colonial enterprise, and how, or if any, an impact on of that in the outcome of the case? Green contends that this case was part of a colonial enterprise that affected four other sects in Bombay.
Nile Green, yes. The relationship of the Imam and British colonial enterprise. Well, yes, of course, there is a very deep and good relationship that they had. But I mean, there's no very good history of it. Um, to finish reading still Zawahir Moore's master's thesis, she had done a discussion of the Imam and the British colonial in Kutch, and his early relationship with Colonel Napier, was it, and as armed compatriots fighting in Sindh. Whether that had an impact on the outcome of the case, I'm not sure. So it was a relation. The British were very clever at using people. So first they used him to fight both the amirs in Afghanistan as well as in Sindh. And then they sent him to Calcutta, where he was quite isolated from his community. So they were, it was, yeah, I'm not sure exactly what impact one can see. And during the case discussions, we don't see any evidence presented by Colonel Napier saying this is a good person, or yeah, this is reliable. So there's no obvious link like that. Certainly colonial enterprise affected four other sects, many others, yes, definitely. And I have compared them with the Vaishnavas, but the Pushti Marg, but I'm sure the Memons as well, and the Dais, and the Parsis as well had a libel case. The Boras had a libel case. So yes, definitely they affected many groups. There's many questions before this. Mira, should we go back?
Are there any other questions?
There was Inara who asked what aspects from
Yeah,
form identity.
it was related to the first question, so I didn't ask that.
Oh, okay.
What aspects form identity of an Ismaili, and how the case impacted these aspects?
Yeah,
It was
so
connected.
aspects of form, yeah, I mean, it is connected to what I said, but in a sense, what I think it's a question to what I believe are aspects of identity that are important. And I think faith, ritual practice, actual practice, choosing, which were actually important as practices of faith, not practices to show that what is important or not important. So they were not political decisions. They were aspects of self and identity. Yeah.
All right, Nazir, do you want to ask the question?
Yes, thank you. One question, Dr. Sodan. Why does this case interest you in your study? Why did you choose this particular case?
Yeah, that's a very good question. But for all good research, it begins as an accident. I was interested in public and religion because I started my thesis in 89, 90, when there is a rise of Hindutva in India. And I was very disturbed by that. So we had already been through almost 7-8 years of riots from 81, 84, 85 to 89. So I thought I want to study why we are so similar and different from each other. So all the Hindu sects are different from each other. Muslim sects are different from each other. And yet we are clumped into all are Hindus and all are Muslims. So I was trying to understand fundamentalist definitions of Islam. So I found this Maharaj libel case, which is a public discussion of what is Hinduism. And then I was looking through case reports and I came up on the 1866 case. So
yeah,
quite
the
by
reason I
accident.
asked you, my
Sorry?
great grandfather gave me evidence in that court.
Oh, okay.
He was a munshi in
Right.
Gujarat. He was murdered for it.
Oh,
When he
wow.
came back from High Court India, he was murdered by the Hindus.
I see.
Yeah,
By
because he
the
was
Hindus?
told. Yeah, because they thought he was a Hindu and not a Muslim.
Oh my God.
Because he was a munshi.
Right.
But he never told them that he was an Ismaili.
He was a Gupti.
So he went to give evidence and he was murdered.
Oh, I would like to know
my
more.
grandfather left overnight and went to Africa. It's the first available boat.
Oh, I see. I would
Now we
really
know.
like to know more about that
Sure,
because
yeah. Well, I've been researching this case myself.
right.
Yeah, so we will connect and
Yeah,
communicate more.
I would like your, yeah, I don't know how to share. Shall I put my email address in my?
Yeah, and I put mine.
Okay, thank you. In the chat.
Yeah.
Excellent. That was very interesting information, and
Yes,
yeah,
because there were other cases that these uh, identifications were really practiced and were held too with great violence. There were 4 murders in Mahim as well, and the people who were the people who were accused of murder actually were penalized for it, and 3 of them were then hanged, and then they were celebrated uh, by the Imami party that they were martyrs for the cause. So yes, these to us they look like academic discussions, but at the time they was very very um, deeply felt. Yeah.
thank you, Dr. Shodhan. There are some very interesting comments like Jamil Savani has written, the content of the Ginans making explicit reference to past Ismaili imams going back at least 3 to 4 centuries also served as evidence of traditional allegiance of the community.
Yes, that's
Then
true. That's true. Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, I didn't go into all the details of the case. There's a lot of the case lasted for 27 days. Every day it was heard. And all the case record is published in the Times of India of that year. Of that, I mean, every day. So day to day, it was really big news. Everybody wanted to read the evidence and who said what. And so it was a really, yeah.
yeah, and there's an interesting comment by Khalil Andani again regarding the Khoja practices. I think probably, if I'm not mistaken, Khalil, you're referring to the contrast that Amrita was drawing between um, the identity of the imam and the external practices. And so he says, don't these show a clear Ismaili commitment and relationship to the historical imams? The old Khoja Dua names and lineage of imams and the Ginans contains names of at least 30 historical Nizari imams from what
Yes,
I have seen.
that's right. So that's also been used as evidence later, not presented at the case, but people have found that actually all these names were historical Nizari imams. So yes, so there is. I never suggested that it was completely a separate group that was identified with the Aga Khan. I would not like to suggest that at all. Even the reformers didn't say that they were not associated. They said we respected them. So they were trying to distance themselves, but they couldn't. And there was
So
plenty of old history that connected. Yeah.
just connecting that, what Khalil Andani has talked about, was the old dua used at all to kind of give evidence?
No, not that I read. Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay.
In
Sure,
fact,
if I can comment, I think the old law got used in the Haji Bibi case, though. I don't know, not the 1866, but it was definitely used later.
right. Yeah, I haven't studied the Haji Bibi case in detail, but that's possible. The other thing I was going to say is that there is a lot of discussion in the Aga Khan's Ibrat-e-Afza, as well as his cousins, his nephew's Ibrat-e-Afza. He has another biography where he says the Aga Khan is introducing new duas, etc. So yeah, that
I
he
think
speaks
that
to.
if nobody has any questions, maybe I can go further. Anyway, thank you so much, Dr. Shodhan. This brings us to the end of the Q&A, and I'd appreciate it that if you all can fill in the feedback form. I'm just going to put in the feedback form in the chat box. Give me a second. That's the feedback form. So please, if you can fill that, that would be great. But thank you so much. On behalf of the Association for the Study of Ginans, a very big thank you to you, Dr. Shodhan, for such an engaging and insightful talk. We enjoyed listening to your wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Many thanks to our IT and design expert, Altaf Bulani, for volunteering your time and expertise. Many thanks to our chairman, Shiraz Pradhan, and the board members who have helped us promote this webinar. Finally, a special thank you to all of you members who have joined us from across the world. Thank you for joining Ginan Insights. And again, please fill in the feedback form in the chat box. Please visit our ASG website and be on a lookout for our future Ginan Insights talks on Facebook and also a webinar recording on our ASG YouTube channel. You will also find the past Ginan Insights recording on YouTube. Thank you all very much and have a wonderful morning, afternoon, and evening.
Thank you very much, though. I'm also very pleased to be here. Thank you, Meera, for inviting me, and Chairman Saab and everybody else. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.